Each year, Microsoft Research hosts hundreds of influential speakers from around the world, including leading scientists, renowned experts in technology, book authors, and leading academics, and makes videos of these lectures freely available.
So we have a department that is quite original because half of the people have joint appointment and are really in something else than computer science. I mean, they mix computer science and other stuff. And I'm going to show that we can organize a big mess with our own data. And actually, we are 5 people or 5 faculty members at least working closely together in bioengineering. And we keep exchanging data and trying to understand each other. And you'll see it's pretty complex. So we try to be organized with our data. It's one of our challenge. And of course, we are open to suggestion. So let me describe what we are doing in terms of application. Okay. So I will introduce basically what are our biomedical project and what is the goal and what is the challenge. And then Victoria Hilford, who is working in our department, will explain some of the solution that we try to deploy. We don't want to reinvent the wheel. We want to solve a specific application problem. And I should say that there are many collaborations with hospitals. So here we have 3 people who are doing image analysis one way or the other. Ioannis Kakaliaris, Ioannis Pavlidis, and George Doridakis. And I'm going to describe this project. And I should say that all these projects are closely connected to collaborators in Mayo Clinic, Baylor, MD Anderson, and so on. So what we are doing typically is non-invasive imaging for cardiovascular disease. For example, you want to evaluate the high abdominal fat volume or abnormal heart function. So what you see on this movie here is the reconstruction of the heart motion, and you can assess the efficiency of the cardiac pump as well as the mass of muscle. You can also reconstruct the heart and the vessels. Another example of application is actually more invasive imaging when you want to have an image of the artery and you want to have the localization of the vulnerable plaque, those who are responsible for cardiac disease. So this is a second type of application. And typically what we do, why it's not showing? I don't understand. Okay. The movie is not showing, I don't understand. Okay. Sorry. So it's on the screen and not there? Well, anyway, I tell you what it shows. Okay, I see. So basically, we have a 3D reconstruction of the heart and all the vessels that are lying on the heart. So this is basically a set of data that we produce for cardiovascular disease. And part of our problem, besides the fact that we generate a lot of data, we have a lot of human subjects, we have to classify that, do special treatment and so on, is the fact that this project has to be interconnected to some others. So I think we just, no problem. So the second class of project actually is medical imaging, but related to the assessment of physiological activity. So those are probably the most cool application that I will show you, and the one who are not that are not so standard, and they generate another type of data. Usually when I work with a computer, it's always like that, you know. So, so basically here you have the 3D reconstruction of the heart and the vessels, and we like to use that for, of course, numerical simulation and get some indicator of the quality of the vessels to the doctor. So the second type of application is the work of Ioannis Pavlidis and his team. It's all based on thermal imaging. And nowadays, you have thermal image cameras that are extremely sensitive, 1% of a degree. You produce 60 frames per second. And what we do with that, it's pretty cool. Basically, when you take a video of a person that is sitting on a chair, basically you can track that person and focus on region of interest. And one of the cool things that we have achieved recently, combining some physics, applied math, and image analysis, is that if we focus on the carotid complex here, we can extract from a distance the heartbeat pulse. So we extract metabolic activity, totally wireless, and this requires a lot of validation. Another cool thing that we did with this system is actually to get from a distance the breath rate. So once again, if you focus on the region of interest here with the right tracker, by doing either signal analysis or statistical analysis, this is a noisy signal that is produced by the system, you can actually get the peak that is corresponding to the breath rate of the person. So it has a number of applications. You can imagine in the hospital, for example, you can work on apnea. Another application that you may enjoy is when someone gets very frustrated with your software, actually the computer can find out about it by doing this signal analysis because probably your breath rate and heartbeat pulse is quite affected. So a third type of application is in the group of George Zouridakis. This one is very much oriented to clinical application. So diagnosis, therapy, and screening. Application are epilepsy, cancer, and schizophrenia. There are some fundamental research that are linked to human learning, languages, and memory. So here what we are doing is that we can identify brain activity with a new generation of sensor. And the application are typically for surgical treatment of epilepsy. If you can localize in the brain the source of the problem with this type of sensor. Also, if you can localize the tumor with this technique. So it's the golden approach that nowadays is used in the hospital is that they dig some hole in your scalp in order to detect by electrodes what is the problem. Eventually, if they open, they apply a matrix to your brain to do the signal analysis of your brain, solve the inverse problem, and localize the source. Of course, this is worse than going to the dentist. So what we are trying to do is to do that with a non-invasive method. So this machine actually can extract 256 signals. And based on that, you can reconstruct the source. For example, here the source of the language or whatever. And there is indeed in this activity a lot of validation, comparison with the hospitals. So you can imagine that we have to move this data around. And unfortunately, in this medical business, there is not so much standard. So part of our activity is to work on the standard and generate the metadata so we can exchange our information before we do anything with it. So some example of this technique, as I said, with all kind of signal analysis, and you can visualize the activity of the brain. So what I've been trying to show here is that if you just take the simple application of brain tumor, you can look at the tumor from the point of view of its morphology with MRI, its metabolic activity, with PET imaging, or you can look at the impact on the way the brain works with MEG and EEG. This is totally different type of data, and they have to be interconnected. They have to be stored. You have many human subjects. Those are the applications that we are really working on. And the thing is that you can also connect to that thermal imaging of the face, because we do a living experiment with human subject. And one thing that is not even on this transparency is actually you can do modeling of a tumor. You have applied math model for that. So we need to interconnect all this data. This is our main goal. My part is more modeling and scientific computing, so I'm used to do multi-scale blood flow, bioheat transfer, and tumor modeling. Actually, I work with these all three Greek guys, so at some point they wanted to change my name from Garbe to Garbedakis. That's the problem with this kind of collaboration. But you have to use domain decomposition, multi-level methods, scalable parallel algorithm, because all these things are HPC indeed. And some example of this activity. For example, they have shown the artery that is lying on the heart. This artery has pulsating flow and it's moving around. And you don't want to spend your life doing meshing. So, for example, fast prototyping of the NS Navier-Stokes flow can use penalty methods. That's one of the things that we are doing. So you need to have some capabilities. I cannot show that because I don't see the screen. You need to have some capability on fluid structure interaction or fast Navier-Stokes flow. So another example where we have to merge all kind of data is face recognition. So you want, for example, to identify a person, wireless, once again, and say if this guy is in the database or not. So you have to combine texture, shape, and infrared. And some of the challenge, of course, in this business is that you have different facial expression, facial hairs. You may have twins. Illumination conditions are different. You may have different poses, accessories, like glasses and so on, the hair. And so once again, the nice thing is that we have people who are doing image analysis with differential deformable model. So that's, for example, that part. Ioannis Pavlidis that is doing detection of vasculature using thermal imaging, and you have to merge and combine all this data. Once again, this is a lot of data. So typically, in order to do this extraction of data, you have 3D information with your face reconstruction here. You have 2D infrared for the temperature map of the skin. And you have to go through all these boxes in order to get a signature of the face with actually going from, let's say, 100K numbers to a signature that is compressed with 200 bytes. So this works, again, it's generate a lot of data and you have to combine them. And you need to have some nice description of that. So the biomedical data of the future are actually non-destructive, quantitative, multidimensional, and spatially resolved. You have high temporal resolution. All these data are very large, high data intensity. We do need stricter standard. It's not yet there. And they are multimodal. So what we have envisioned in this project is to design new computational tools for that. And we just got a large MRI from NSF for this project. And basically, we do have access to a number of database in various hospitals, and we have fast network to them. So we can get, for example, the data like MRI or PET imaging that we don't have on site for a given person. And then we run in our facility campaign of experiment. So far, we do that for each group, but we envision that we are going to combine all these sensors in one single room. And therefore, the kind of architecture that you need to have for solving this problem is, first of all, some fast machine that are going to do, that are going to process the data from the sensors and dump that on a large Beowulf system that will be good for fast parallel I/O. And in the meantime, you need a couple of let's say 8 ways Opteron or system like that in order to do real-time analysis and check that your data are not garbage. They are actually valuable data, and it's right to keep storing them. So we will do campaign of experiment few weeks during the year and open our facility to many centers. And then a posteriori, you do science discovery and parallel processing and data mining on all this data you have stored here. So this is a facility that has to be designed for this special purpose, actually. And also you need to do several types of visualization, like playing with two-dimensional array of screens or basically large 3D video on plasma screen. Those are different things in terms of visualization. The image analysis, the numerical simulation, the acquisition of data, of course, it's going to be, it might be done in different places, as it was shown in the previous talk. So I think I'm going to let Victoria to explain now how we are trying to deal with all this data and organize them. Okay. Good.
Jim made a great point at the beginning. We have a lot of haystacks. And usually maybe your application has one haystack and you have the problem of finding something or discovering something on top of it. In our case, we have these brilliant projects and labs that actually they function by themselves and independently, and they get grants and they produce great results, as Dr. Garby mentioned. So our challenge is to deal with several haystacks, put them together, and with that information, we can actually do discovery. These are medical projects, so we have issues to deal with. The basic issue is how to keep this information private. There's the privacy so our project, once we combine these haystacks, is to keep that private. So once we put it together, as Jim mentioned, we can have scientists work against this data to create new tools or discover. Also, we want the patients to be accessing their information. Like I saw the doctor today, I'm going next week. I don't want to know more than the doctor does. But also, I want to keep track of my medical record and everything that happened to me. So we can provide maybe several levels of access, like full access when we store this information, maybe a different type of access for the scientists to discover, and maybe a restricted access for the patients. So the amount of data, we looked at the EEG, the brain imaging data, for 1 hour of recording. We have 256 channels. This is non-intrusive, so the brain signals are captured by channels for 2 kilohertz per second. We can generate in an hour 15 gigabytes of data. Same thing for the infrared. So the issue of having large amounts of data, it's an issue that we have to deal with besides the privacy. I stepped in, and I am not a doctor, even though the professors in the computer science that are involved in the various medical images, they are not doctors either. They deal with doctors. So we have to acquire the expertise in the domain and understanding to the point where we can create something that's useful. What I have here is our concept of how we can integrate these haystacks into one secure place, and how to extract useful information, we call that metadata, about this multimodality data. They come from various sources. From a hospital, you get a DICOM image. There's very large gigabytes, but that's something that's a standard. For the infrared group, it's a different type of data. So the issue of how to integrate all these databases or forms of data into something that's useful later on, that's one of our challenges. What I presented here is a web application. So we want this to be accessed over the web by clients, by doctors, by anybody. So what we envision this is use Microsoft. We have built a grid of computers that are not only used for we call this WING, which stands for Windows Grid. is not only used by the wing application, but we have HPC applications that use the hardware and the software. We are overwhelmed by the amount of data and the type of data, so we want to use the largest Lego blocks we can find out there. So we relied on Microsoft. They provided us with hardware and the technology. We use the .NET, we use SQL Server and their capabilities. So we are trying to do something quickly and efficiently. So this is the design that we are using right now. This is our application. And over the net, the client images, either infrared, EEG data, are securely. So we have to encode these files when we transfer them to one of the servers in the grid. And also extracting the metadata out of these files and store it in a SQL Server database. With this infrastructure, so we are using the Microsoft infrastructure to build an infrastructure that the medical applications can use. So this is sort of like, if you like to look at it, like phase one of our project, when we try to archive all these sorts of multimodality data. Again, we want to build this quickly. I call this the wing application. So using the technologies, the .NET, the ASP.NET, the ADO.NET, we can actually archive and store metadata for the, we want to have security, and also we have to allow access to the information based on roles. Store this in the database using ADO.NET. We can actually extract and view the information we have stored in the haystack. And with this infrastructure, we can apply queries and also do visual modeling. So these are the objectives that we have for this wing. This is the technology we used. We do not want to write everything from scratch. We don't even attempt to do that. So we are using what's available. And so we built the wing application as a web application. It has a portal where everybody can interface with. And we can use the SQL Server to store the information, the metadata about these files. Again, we can store, we can update, retrieve, we can apply querying, we can apply functions that the SQL Server give us to data mine, analysis, logging, and tracking. So again, with archiving, the second phase for our project is to create new tools, also to create new biomedical applications that have access to all these different haystacks. So we create a super meta haystack, but we have the information, a smart information stored where this discovery process can take place. Of course, we are using the Microsoft practices, and we are using the N-tier model. This is the hardware we have. I mentioned we have a grid of computers. And so the eScience can be carried out by using the data stored anywhere on the grid and the computing power of the computers we have. The eScience one has 2 terabytes of storage, and we can use that. Again, each image can be up to gigabytes. So every day, probably for a medical imaging project, you have terabytes of data generated. So using the grid computers and their data storage capability, we can store this information. We do not store the actual images in the database. We only store a pointer to that. So this is the grid. This is the computer science. And this is the College of Technology. The grid also extends with nodes all over the world. So it's not only limited to the University of Houston. As far as software we used, I mentioned to you we use big Lego blocks. So we are using the Visual Studio.NET, and actually we are using the 2005, and we were successful with it, and the SQL Server 2005. So right now the files are stored on eScience, the big 2 terabyte data storage server. and the metadata is stored on the same system. And let me show you. This is the brain imaging project. We have, like I mentioned, we have 3 others, but this is just for an example. So once they acquire the original data, they have a head cap and they have channels. So these waves are measured, are stored in several files. So if you think of this as the data acquisition stage, they run some programs, processing, and they come up with the channels where noise is eliminated. And after that, they are applying some algorithms to determine if this is a clinical case to see if the subject or the patient has schizophrenia or not. Now, what you can see here at all levels, they have data files they have generated. Our job when we implement this is to actually store these data files in a way that's intelligent enough for them to be able to retrieve and also to use later on. So what we have done as far as how to implement only this application is we have the client images that reside on the client machine. This is our web application, and we allow these images, and again, the type of metadata for each type of file is going to be different. So coming up with a database schema for each type of project is what's our challenge. We have to store the information in a way that makes sense for each project. Also, later on, that will allow discovery. Also, later on, they will allow all from the top, all these different type of haystacks to talk to each other. At this point, for this brain imaging project, this is the server that we use for the files and for the SQL Server. So the client at this time, the phase 1, the archiving phase, is going to upload these files. They will be securely transferred to the file server, and also the metadata. Our challenge is, as computer scientists, to guide biomedical scientists in what kind of information will be useful to them. So we have once we are implementing archiving of the infrared, of the biomedical and brain images, we have to be able to query, so we'll create tools in addition. So this is an infrastructure that we'll create for all these biomedical projects. With that infrastructure, we will be able to create new tools to query. They will be able to access and visualize, so the realm of applications, either biomedical or computer science or whatever, is going to be open to new possibilities. So this is what we have implemented right now, is the archiving. And again, the challenge as far as questions, you might have questions for us. I know we have questions for you. So if you have expertise in this area, we'd like to talk to you to see how you deal with biomedical imaging, and maybe we can use you instead of. But anyhow, this is what we are doing at the University of Houston. It's very exciting. The biomedical projects, open doors for possibilities, and we want to give them the infrastructure using the Microsoft technologies. Any questions? Any questions? Yes, it is. We have clients, and they get data like from hospitals. They bring them on CDs, and right now their haystack is they are overwhelmed with the amount of data. Especially when the useful information about the data is in the header itself, they just deal with files that don't mean much. So by archiving the files and extracting the metadata, we actually give them the tools to deal with their files. Yes?
Thank you. Lots of these data, I imagine, are annotated by the doctors that have different
No, these are, if they come from the hospital, like the MRI data, the header is standard, is a DICOM standard. The EEG data, it's a BDF standard, so when actually it's recorded, the proprietary software creates the file that way. So in the infrared, that's an in-house software, so they have their different headers. So no, they are not annotated. But we can allow, that as part of multimodal data, to have. Question?
Oh, yeah. I think you mentioned about domain knowledge, and then you also mentioned about how to integrate heterogeneous knowledge source. Now I want to understand, when you said integrate, what exactly do you mean? Are you referring to physical storage of those? Are you referring to
At this time, they will be independent. When we say integrate, that means somebody, a meta, can actually understand and interpret all these types of different data. You have an answer?
One aspect is the fact that you have to get access to these data and combine them, which is absolutely not obvious. And the second aspect is to have the right application to fusion this data. So this is also part of the problem. But it's more the end user.
Because extraction is a big problem in biomedical research.
Oh, yes.
Especially when they're trying to combine all this knowledge to derive any conclusion.
Yes, that's the major.
On the computing infrastructure, or your focus is more on some knowledge?
Answering a question such as relate the facial expression and the brain activity to behavior and cognitive capability will be answered only when you get access to all these different haystacks, because the information for the face expression comes from one data source. The information about brain activity comes from a different one, but that's an application that will give you the answer. So I understand. I'm not saying we came up with a solution. What I'm saying is very complicated. And if we knew the higher level picture to suggest to these biomedical researchers, store it this way, because later on you'll have meta haystack, but that is our challenge. Yes? Yes, when we transfer the files, we can compress them, so it will be stored in compressed format. Our main phase one part is to allow each biomedical project to archive their data while extracting meaningful information that they can use. I think right now they are overwhelmed by the amount of files they have. So managing those files, it's the phase one. But yes, compression is because they are very large.
Our
yes.
problem is not so much to have a generic solution for that. We use all kind of tools, all kind of compression tools when we want to communicate indeed. But I think our real goal is to solve some specific bioengineering problem. And when we try to solve this specific bioengineering problem, we try to combine all the skills, all the knowledge that we have in our team and collaborators. And actually, it's quite a lot of people. But this is what is exciting for us, the application.
But building the right infrastructure will allow answering many questions as such.
Hopefully.